Hello Fiends, I'm Rob Poyton. Thanks for joining me today on this Halloween edition of Dragon's Teeth. Today I'm going to be looking at some horror themed board games. Now if you're into horror gaming, I would highly recommend you take a listen to the Good Friends of Jackson Elias podcast. I'll put the link up in the notes below. It's an excellent podcast and they cover all aspects of horror gaming, particularly relating to Call of Cthulhu. So do give them a listen. Now, if horror is your thing when it comes to gaming, you're spoilt for choice. If we think about video and computer games, well, there's thousands. We could spend ages going into those. If you are into your Lovecraftian games, then do take a look at my recent chat with Tim Mendes, who's currently writing a book on Lovecraftian video games and gives us his list of the top 5. When it comes to tabletop wargaming, well, of course, there's a big horror element in fantasy games. You normally see skeletons and ghouls and werewolves, that kind of thing. And I'm also actually just going to be putting up either today or very soon my first War Master report, which sees the debut of my Vampire Count army. Seemed appropriate to bring them out at this time of year. Aside from that, we have games like Zombicide, which I did a report on a little while back. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And I believe there's a set of skirmish rules come out not that long ago, which is set in the Napoleonic era and is based heavily around the horror theme. And of course that time is our first classic Gothic era. We've got the emergence of Frankenstein, Dracula comes along a little bit later, and so on. So I'll definitely be getting my teeth into that one at some point as well. When it comes to RPGs, we've also got a nice selection. The two big standout names for me are Call of Cthulhu and Vampire the Masquerade, both of which make an excellent job of really capturing the feel, the atmosphere, the flavour of their particular topic. And also both, I think, played a leading role in developing RPGs, because Call of Cthulhu brought in that mystery solving element. It was much less about combat, and then Vampire the Masquerade, even more so. A lot of that was about social interaction and really put a lot of emphasis on developing the character and storytelling. But you know, we see the influence in other places as well. For example, one of my favourite D&D scenarios is Ravenloft, set in a sort of, well, it's Count Strahd von Zarovich, I think, set in his castle with an amazing map. And the wonderful thing about that scenario was it was presented in such a way that it would change every time, because the motivations of the main characters and the NPCs could change. Now, when it comes to board games, I'm first going to think back to my childhood, the dim and distant murky past. And there were two games that stood out there for me. One was the classic Haunted House, where players moved from room to room in this spooky old mansion, and at some point you might trigger a trap which involved dropping a ball bearing down the chimney, and something nasty could potentially happen to your character. And the other one that we really used to enjoy playing as kids was Game of Dracula. I can't remember too much about the mechanics of it now, but I seem to remember being chased by big plastic bats at some point. So that was an excellent game. If we move more into the sort of adult market, we can think of games like Arkham Horror and so on. But these can be very involved. So what I thought I'd look at today are a few games that are very easily to set up if you've got friends around. They're easy to get into, easy to learn, but they do create just the right atmosphere, just the sort of thing you're looking for in a horror game, especially at this time of year. I have owned all of these games at some point. Unfortunately, I've only got one of them left. The others have disappeared in the mists of time. So I'm going to take a quick look at the first two and then a more in-depth look at the one I still have, the Gothic game. But we're going to start off with a game called Atmosphere. Atmosphere came out in 1991 and really tapped into the video boom at the time, because the unusual thing with this game was you put in a video cassette, remember those? And you had to complete the game within the length of the video, which I think was about 50 minutes. So you'd have this character called the Gatekeeper come up on the screen and set the scene. You had to write down in secret what your worst fear was, and then the game would progress. And basically what you had to do is collect 6 keys and take them to the Well of Fears, where you would then face your worst fear. And I think the Gatekeeper would crop up every now and again and give certain instructions to one player or to the whole group. It was a lot of fun and very easy to play. Now this game was really successful. I think it was Australian originally. I think it was created in Australia, and it sold 2 million copies in the first 2 years. So that spawned a number of sequels. Of course, as technology moved on, we moved from video cassette to DVD. Then I'm sure there was a computer version. And I think I saw a little while back there's a Kickstart going on to actually relaunch it again today. So that was Atmosphere, probably the easiest of the games to play. And as I say, you're there because you're working to that tape or DVD. You know it's going to be under an hour long. So a good, quick, easy game. So the second game we're going to look at, and my personal favourite, is Bram Stoker's Game of Dracula. This came out alongside the film, of course, in 1992. And this was almost like a murder mystery party. I remember back at that time as well, these things were quite popular. You get a whole box with a murder mystery evening at it. You had some friends around, you sat around dinner and you played out this murder mystery. Well, this was the same, but with fangs and sound effects as well. Now, this was for 6 to 12 players. So to me, this one is almost bordering on LARP. You didn't really play a character as such, unless you were the vampire, of course. The story was, you're stranded in this house and one of you is the vampire. So the way the game works is you'd put on a cassette. You'd all start in one room and they had something called the spinner. So you turn this spinner and that will give you instructions. There were also numerous cards that came into play. In fact, I remember in this box there was a lot of stuff in it. I mean, you got plastic fangs, you got the cassette, you got all these cards and little character things. A really well packed and well presented game. So that was the idea. You get these instructions, you move around the house, and of course if you find yourself alone in the room with the vampire, then you'd also become the vampire as well. And the cassette would be playing. Of course you set this up so that would be heard throughout the whole house, and that was your sort of background effects, your wind, wolves howling, all that kind of stuff. But every now and again you get the funereal tolling of a bell, and I think when you got that, you all had to go back to the main room and it was like another round. So as I say, a really well presented game and something very different and very unusual. And I remember playing that several times, and even though at the time, well, most of the time we were playing in my house, which was a fairly typical sort of 3-bedroom Victorian house in East London. But even in that space, once you get the lights off and the candles on and that music going and there's someone prowling around with the fangs, it really did create an excellent atmosphere. Now, I imagine the game is out of print now, I'm pretty sure it is, but I have seen copies going on eBay for about 50 quid. And for that price, if you got the money, I'd highly recommend it. I did have a copy of that, but I did sell it a few years ago, one of those things, So we get on to our third and final game. And it's one that I haven't really seen a lot of. I picked up a copy, I think it was second hand, years ago. I think I saw it in a second hand shop, and I've still got the sticker on it. It was like £2 or something. So it looked very interesting. I bought it and we played this one a lot as well. It's called the Gothic game. The nice thing with these games I've spoken about is, for me, they bridge that gap between your sort of kiddie games, your haunted house and everything else, which can still be fun, and your more complex and involved sort of war game or RPG type board games. As I said before, these games are very easy to get into, but I wouldn't quite call them kids games necessarily, because this one in particular, the first thing it says on the back is the aim of this game is simple: to kill all the other players. And the other interesting thing with this game, it's probably one of the things that caught my eye, is on the back here there's a recommendation from Terry Jones of Monty Python fame. I haven't had so much fun since I became a vampire. This game will make you turn in your grave. Suitable for all ages, 8 to 380. Well, I'm not sure about 8, but I don't know, if your kids are into this sort of stuff, then fine. So let's take a look at what the game involves. So here's the Gothic game. And there's our board, which represents a big old castle surrounded by a moat. And what you get in the box here are a set of rules. You get some sheets to keep track of players' stamina points. We get a set of cards. These relate to specific rooms, the den, the torture chamber and so on. And we get our player pieces, which are just simple counters, except for the vampire, of course, who, when he takes you over, simply does that. Very nice. And this all runs on a D6, so you get a little shaker and your dice inside as well. So 2 to 8 players, and as I said, the objective is simply to kill everyone. You do that by moving around the board and collecting weapons. Then you have to move adjacent to someone in order to attack them. So movement is controlled by a dice. You roll the d6 and that's the number of squares. If you roll a 6, you get to have an extra roll as well. And you move around. Now you know that there are definitely weapons in a couple of the rooms. There are definitely weapons in the torture chamber and the trophy room, and there's also one hidden in the kitchen as well. But when you go in these other rooms, you get other things that might be useful or might not. So, for example, I move into this room, the den, I take that card on top, and that says Insatiable Leech. This little parasite causes you to lose stamina for each go until you throw a 3 or 6. Lose 25 points the first go, 20 the next, 15 the next, and so on until he bursts. And I should mention, every character starts the game with 100 stamina points, and once you get down to 0, of course, then you're dead. So that's basically how it works. Of course, you can only enter the rooms through these specific doorways, but there are also some special squares as well. If you get on one of these green ones, then that's an entrance to a secret passage. So you could go from this one to that one, for example, in your turn, and then continue playing from there. If you land on a yellow arrow, then that is a trap, and you have to immediately go to the place that is mentioned on the trap. So here, for example, you get pulled into the great spiral staircase, and you keep moving down there until I think you have to roll a 6 to start reversing your way back out. There is also, as you have in every good castle, of course, an oubliette, and should you happen to finish your turn on that, you're down there, that's it, you're out of the game, no messing about. So, as I say, you go around really trying to collect weapons and these other cards. Some cards are beneficial. For example, in the kitchen here, Winter Plums, gain 25 points. Under the magical influence of the plums, you float immediately to the green square of your choice. So these can help you move around, they can boost your stamina, and so on. So if you finish your turn next to another player, you get the power of adjacency over them. This represents the fact that the corridors are dark and you have your opponent by the throat before they have a chance to move. So when you do this, you get a choice. You can either use your weapon and attack them, try and kill them. You can control their next move, so they throw the dice but you tell them where to go. So potentially you could send them down the oubliette or down the spiral staircase. Or if you have a relevant card, you can give them something unpleasant such as an asp or a wet rat down the back. So some of these cards you get to keep and you can actually play later on. There is the possibility of falling into the moat, in which case you take some damage to your stamina points, you lose some stamina points, and you have to roll a dice. If you get a 5 or a 6, all's well, you start at the gateway again. Should you throw a 4, however, you end up in the vault, which is not good news because that naturally is where Dracula lives. Dracula immediately takes you over. You lose some stamina points, 20 stamina points I think, and it says in the rules, several pints of blood. That's the bad news. The good news is, for 6 turns now, you get to be a vampire. You roll 2 dice to move around, and even just simply passing someone in the corridor will potentially kill them. Not only does it kill them, but it gives you an extra 20 stamina points as well. However, if that person has the stake card or something similar, then the tables are turned. And of course, if you survive that 6 goes at the end of that, Dracula is returned to the vault and you are free to go about your business as a mere mortal. So there's 1 or 2 other little things in here as well. We have the lavatory. This little room is self-explanatory. It may not be occupied by 2 players at the same time. That sounds fair enough. But just next to the lavatory, we also have the tower as well. So the tower is a vantage point. It houses a cauldron of oil permanently on the boil, ready to be poured over the battlements as soon as you arrive. So basically, if anyone is on the squares below and you're in the tower, they get the boiling oil treatment. And there's also a weapon amongst these cards called the Congolese blowpipe, which is obviously a missile ranged weapon, and that can be used with great effect from the tower as well. That's pretty much it for the gameplay. So the rules are simple and straightforward, and of course what makes it fun are these various cards. You never know quite what you're getting. Breastplate gives protection against the meat hook and skewer. Garlic, well, obviously that's going to give you protection against the vampire. A great feast. Enjoy yourself and gain 20 points, but you are so drunk with bonhomie that for the next 2 goes you must move towards the nearest player on the board. So all those little things add to the fun and give the game its flavour. So there we are then, 3 board games that are perfect for this time of year. Great if you've got some friends around who aren't really into wargaming or RPGs or whatever. Easy to set up, easy to get into, and a great deal of fun, particularly those last 2. Do let me know your favourite horror board game, particularly in this field, the kind of thing you can set up very easily. Or what's your favourite RPG horror system? I mentioned Call of Cthulhu, Vampire Masquerade. I think there's Cult. I played a few times in the past. I'm sure there must be many others as well. Or if you've played that Napoleonic skirmish game I was talking about, I'll be very interested to hear about that as well. As always, if you're enjoying the channel, please do like, share and subscribe. All that remains to say is have a happy Halloween. I see the witching hour is approaching. There's a bad moon rising. It's time for me to go and change.